In last week's video, I took you to a river nearby my house at sunset and we painted this scene. But as the sun dipped behind the hills, the whole landscape turned very warm and the colors transformed. So I'm going to paint it again with new colors and share my thoughts about this process. Okay, so I've been sitting here for a while looking at the results from last week's painting by the river, and I think I did a decent job capturing some of the light effects that I was going for, but as I was looking at the videos, I noticed obviously towards sunset, like as the sun was about to set over the horizon, everything got very, very warm and a lot darker, more like higher contrast. It had a totally different feeling from when I sat down at the initial stages to paint it. So an hour before sunset, it looked like this. And then by the end, right before sunset or at sunset, it had totally different colors. Part of this challenge was to immerse myself in that light and just really soak it in. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since that day. And again, I enjoyed this result. I enjoyed the experience, but now I want to paint it again, but closer to sunset with the totally different colors, the warm colors. And I have a bunch of references from that time to see the differences. So we're going to sit down and we're going to paint it again, and I'm going to share some of my thoughts about that process. So last time I started off with a light wash of water, and then I dropped my color in so that everything would be very soft. I wanted the sky and the water to have a very pastel feel to it, very subtle. And because I was more focused on the light pouring across the land, I didn't really think about giving the sky or the water too much color. But this time around, I could see that I needed a lot more color, a bit punchier color in the sky and the water. In addition to using warmer and more saturated tones in this piece, I was using gouache in a totally different way. Rather than starting with thin layers and building up, I went straight into using thick gouache. This approach requires a little bit more forethought, I think, because instead of layering up my colors and textures, I'm getting a lot of the painting done from the very first brush strokes. So I know that I'm not going to come back too much over a lot of the areas that I'm doing first. I think working a little bit thicker forces me to think ahead more, because I know that if I layer too much thick paint, it kind of turns into a muddy mess. So I have to be a little more careful with that. But because I had already painted it on location and once back in the studio, I'm building upon that experience. So I am feeling a little bit more confident in this go. I really have grown to enjoy painting scenes more than once. I used to hate it, and I used to think I was just getting lucky if I painted something really well. But now I know that painting something multiple times is very empowering, because every single time you do it, you learn so much. And in my case, I'm tweaking colors, I'm changing things a little bit here and there, but every single time I'm building upon past experiences, and that accumulated knowledge just continues to build, and I feel like it allows me to paint something more accurately or more close to my intention. One thing I find really challenging about painting sunset scenes is getting the values correct. A lot of the values in our scene are very similar. The biggest contrast will be between the sky and everything else, or in this case there's also reflected water, which will be very light. So everything within the landscape, the mountains, the hills, the trees, the grass, is all very close together on a value scale. And so you just need very subtle differences between each object. And especially when so many of the colors are warm, you just need a tiny touch of orange or red to shift it ever so slightly so you can see the difference between two trees that are next to each other. One thing I find that helps is to take my reference photo and put something white in front of it so I can see how incredibly dark things are compared to that white spot. This reminds me not to go too light and to be bold and trust myself so that my mixes end up being dark enough. Before I started using gouache, I was very heavily into watercolor. So using gouache a little thicker like this takes a very conscious effort. My first instinct is always to approach it from a watercolor mindset, but I have to admit that painting a little bit thicker like this is so relaxing. I think it actually suits my painterly style a little bit better, so it's something that I'm really going to work on this winter. And I want to remind you that I do share lots of gouache and watercolor tutorials over on my Patreon. If you're interested in getting into this medium, go have a look, and hopefully there's a tutorial there that suits you. One thing that makes this strategy even more difficult is the fact that a lot of times gouache dries looking a little bit darker or a slightly different color than when it's wet. So when you're using very minor adjustments in color or value, you have to set it down and then wait a second to see if it's going to be enough. A lot of times, especially when I was working on those background trees, I was touching a little bit of color or, a little brush stroke here and there, waiting for it to dry and realizing, oops, it was a little too dark or a little too light. So this process seemed to take a little bit longer. However, I got into a really good rhythm with it, and by the end of the painting, I felt that I had a better sense for how certain mixes will dry. So this technique may be a little bit challenging for beginners, but I also think it's a great way to really get to know your colors. So going back to the topic of painting the same scene multiple times, do you remember Monet's Haystack series? It was a series of 25 or so paintings that he did of the same haystacks, but over multiple seasons. So I think he started one summer and ended it the following spring. And the whole point was for him to study the different effects of light in different seasons on the same subject. And I've always found that fascinating. And so since I live close to this river and I find it to be a very beautiful subject, and the light is always so different, I think I'm going to try to paint it multiple times over the next year. So right now, this is the autumn version, and then maybe in a month or so, I'll paint early winter and so on. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that journey. Otherwise, I'll probably just, do a video maybe in a year from now, revisiting it and showing you how things evolved over the course of a year. I hope you enjoyed coming along with me on this little color journey and revisiting a scene I shared with you last week. Of course, I'll link to that video if you missed it. But thank you so much for your likes and comments. I really appreciate the interaction because it helps my channel grow. I just love the idea of getting more and more people into gouache because it's such a fun medium. All right, I will see you all again soon. Take care. Hello everyone, I just wanted to share a quick message that my Scotland calendars are now on sale over on my web shop. I'll put a link in the description, so if you're looking for a gift for someone this year for Christmas and want to support an independent artist, this would be a great option. It's full of my favorite photos of Scotland over the last year. It's a desk calendar design and it doesn't take up a lot of space, but it has large images, so when the calendar is finished, you can cut these out and frame them or give them as gifts as well. You can definitely get a lot of life out of this little calendar. We only made 100 and they're all signed by me. Once these calendars are gone, they're gone. So make sure you order soon. Okay, that's it. Take care, everyone.